Hey everyone, it's Kelly. Thanks for joining me. I am back today with a video for Altenew's September 2019 blog hop for their stamps, dies, and stencils new release. And I created two projects with this new release, and this is the first of the two. I'm just going to start by showing you some of the stamp sets that I received from this new release. So this is the Happy Pomegranate stamp set. This is the Birch Impressionism stamp set, and it is a layering stamp set. I also received the Faceted Stars, which is a great background stamp. And then I also have the Flower Garden stamp set, and the images that are stamped on the paper are from this set. And I was really inspired by the artwork on the back of that stamp set. So I'm going to try to recreate that the best that I can. So I've already stamped these flowers on this piece of white cardstock, and I did use a waterproof ink so that way there is not any smudging as I am watercoloring. And I did apply a layer of clear gesso to this paper before I stamped the images, just because I wanted to make sure that these colors that I'm using, which are distress inks and distress oxides, would be able to blend together well. So I let that dry, stamped the images in the waterproof ink, and now I'm coming in with the distress inks. So I could have used watercolor paper to watercolor these flowers, but the only watercolor paper that I have is that off-white ivory color. And I knew that I was going to be using white cardstock as my background, so I didn't want to have two variations of that color on the same layout. And in that image that I showed you on the stamp set, there was a lot of white space on these flowers. So if I had any white space, you would have been able to see the difference between the white from the cardstock background and the white from the watercolor paper. And it just wouldn't have matched, and that would have bothered me. I know some people it doesn't really matter, but for some reason it just wasn't jiving well with me this day. So I actually end up painting these entire flowers, so it would have been fine for me to use the watercolor paper, but when I was going into it, I wasn't sure what I was going to end up with. Now I am using a few different colors of the Distress Oxide inks. I am using Abandoned Coral and Candied Apple to color the pink portions of the flowers, and then I'm coming in, I'm pretty sure it's Fossilized Amber, to color the centers of the flowers, just to give it some more variation and just a little bit more detail. I'm going to come in with a couple colors for the leaves. I'm going to start out with Cracked Pistachio Distress Oxides, and all of those previous colors that I mentioned, those are Distress Oxides. I will bring in a Distress ink a little bit later, and I think you can see it there on the screen right now. And I can't see it on my editing screen. I can't read which ink it is, but I'm pretty sure it is Evergreen Bough that I use to finish coloring in those leaves, again, just to add some variation in color. And I'm not worried about staying in the lines as I'm coloring these, because I am going to fussy cut them out and add them as embellishments on my layout a little bit later on. So no big deal if it's super messy at this point. I'm also going to add a couple layers of color as I'm going through this. I tend to be super impatient when it comes to watercoloring. I think that's why I don't do it very often. I don't like to add layers. I'm one of those people that just likes to add one layer and it be exactly how I want it to be, but sometimes you just have to go back in and add multiple layers. So that's what I'm doing here. As the first layers are drying, they're just not quite as vibrant as I'm wanting. So I'm just coming back in to add some more pops of color. I'm also going to add some splatters in just a second, just kind of all across these flowers and leaves, again, just for another pop of color and just for a little visual interest. So I'm going to set that aside to dry, and I grabbed the Birch Impressionism stamp set, and I actually really liked how these were laid out on the stamp set. They reminded me of some sketchy drawn lines, and I wanted to use them exactly as is. So I actually cut the packaging from the stamp set. So this is actually the piece of plastic or acetate that the stamp comes on, and I just cut off the bottom portion, and I'm going to use that acetate as my stamping block. I could have peeled them off and put them on a stamp block, but I didn't think I'd be able to get the spacing exactly how it is on this stamp set. So I just figured I would just use the stamp as the block, and it worked out great. So I'm just using some black ink, and I'm going to stamp these down this 12 by 12 cardstock. I wasn't sure where I was going at this point. I wasn't sure if I was going to tear this or if I was going to use it as the background or what I was going to do. But I actually end up cutting these strips down. Now this stamp set does come with a die. I had not received the die at this point when I'm making this layout, but it does come with a die. So if you're interested in a similar look like this, you could purchase the die and do the same thing. I used my paper trimmer and scissors and my hands and just kind of tore these into random size strips. And I actually just happened to toss them down on my layout, just toss them down on my desk after I had them cut. And I loved how they landed on the piece of paper. So I didn't even want to pick them up to move them. So I went ahead and adhered down the center of these strips so that way they would stay exactly where they were at. I really like how they're askew and off center and just kind of scattered around rather than being just straight lines going down the paper. I think that it just adds a lot of interest to the background. So normally I would do mixed media before I adhere anything down, but like I said, I did not want to move them. So I adhered them, and now I'm coming in with a Shimmerz paint. This is Pull Me Closer from Shimmerz, and it's just this really pretty blue color. And I'm just adding paint behind the flowers and underneath those strips of paper, just again, to add some more color and add some more visual interest. So at this point, I hadn't even decided on a photo that I was going to use. I was so in love with the colors and just so inspired by the stamp sets. I started with that. Normally I have an idea of what photo I want to use, so I know the color scheme that I'm going to work with, but it was opposite this time for me. So I went through my camera roll on my phone and came across these photos of a sunset. It was taken one day when my husband and I were driving home. We had went to dinner, and the sunset was just absolutely gorgeous. So I was driving. So I told my husband to grab my phone and take some pictures out the driver's side window as we were driving home. So he snapped these photos. So that's the curve that you see, that black curve in the photo. It's actually the door on our vehicle. But the colors matched perfectly with those flowers. So it was just meant to be. So I printed them in some different sizes. I wasn't sure what size photo I want to use, but I actually ended up using one of the larger and one of the smaller. I just liked how it looked on the layout. I felt like it was a little bit different going this route, using two different size photos than using the exact same size photo, just kind of back to back. So I just want to take one quick second here and ask those of you who are watching that make YouTube videos what type of lighting you use for your videos. I had studio lights that I had purchased from a local photographer and had used for years and years and years. And I moved into a new scrapbook room about a year ago, and they worked fine. And now all of a sudden, when I have both of them plugged in, it pops the breaker in my scrapbook room. So I either have to use natural light, which I do not prefer to use because it's very unreliable. As you can see in this video, the sun will be out one minute and then it gets overcast, and it just, the lighting situation just really isn't working for me. So I'm curious if any of you have recommendations. I'm going to purchase some new lighting, but I don't want to go through the hassle of purchasing something and then not liking it and having to ship it back. So please let me know in the comments below if you make videos and you have a lighting system that you like to use. If you could also leave a link to that lighting system if you happen to purchase it on Amazon, I would greatly appreciate it. Okay, so getting back to the video, I did add a line of machine stitching just using white thread through each of those strips of paper, again, just for extra texture and just to add something a little bit more to the layout. And I added the leaves that I watercolored to each of those flowers, and I'm liking how this is looking, but now comes the time when I need to try to figure out what I'm going to use to embellish. So I did grab a few hearts from the Live Your Dream scrapbook collection. They're chipboard hearts, and I like the colors and I like how they kind of nestled into the flowers. And then I'm also going to add some chipboard phrases and then also some stickers from, I believe it's the Reflection scrapbook collection. And they just talk about take the scenic route and just kind of those type of generic phrases, which works out really well for this type of layout. And now begins the epic battle of the title for this layout. I cannot tell you how much I struggled with this title. I cut out so much video footage because it took me, I think, as long to do the rest of the layout as it did for me to figure out the title. So I'm starting with these alphabets from the Live Your Dream scrapbook collection, and then I also grabbed the alphabets from the Reflection scrapbook collection. And I love the fonts, but it was too long. I was going to start with Summer Sunset, but it was just too much. I couldn't figure out placement, so I pull everything off, and when I can't figure out what to do, I tend to move on to something else. So I'm just gonna kind of look around at my desk, see if there's anything else that I want to add. I'm looking at these wood veneer shapes. I'm thinking about maybe using one of those as part of my title. I think about adding some of these wood epoxy buttons, but decide against that. So now I'm going to come back in with some more mixed media as I'm trying to debate what to do for the title. So just to give you an idea of what else I tried, I grabbed some alpha die sets that Altenew has, and I cut out the word sunset in some pattern papers. I also did some ink blending on a piece of white cardstock using the same colors that I used to color the flowers in kind of an ombre fashion, and used die sets to cut out the word sunset. Didn't like how that looked either. So I ended up just taking a break and coming back to it. So I went back to the alphabets from the Reflection Scrapbook collection and decided just to go with the word sunset. But then I had this big void in between the strips of paper and the word sunset. So I was looking through some of the Altenew stickers, and I came across the sticker that had the word this in it, and I thought, okay, that'll be perfect. So I fussy cut out the word this, and it's in the same font as those alphabets from the Reflection Scrapbook collection. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll mix it up. Maybe I'll use that font for the word this, and then I'll use the more scripty font from the Live Your Dream Scrapbook collection. And as I put down that first letter S, I'm like, oh, I kind of like how it looks combined using the alphabets from both of the scrapbook collections. So that's what I end up doing. I end up using both of them. And I can't believe that I had never thought about combining those two alphabet sets before, but I really like how it came together. And I'm just going to show you some still shots here. Again, this is part of Altenew's new release blog hop. So I will put a link to my blog in the description box below if you happen to be watching this on YouTube. I do want to encourage you to head back to my blog. That way you can hop along on the blog hop and get more inspiration from all the other designers that are participating. And there's also information about the giveaways that Altenew is offering on my blog. So make sure you head there, check all of that out. I do appreciate you all so much for watching, and I will be back again very soon with a new layout and process video.